Be sure to subscribe to the channel and let's promote respect for the Royal Guard together. Let the whole world see how many of us there are.
When an overconfident tourist disrupted the sacred traditions of the Royal Guard, he met a fate that left the entire square breathless. But what happened afterward shocked everyone even more. The square in front of Buckingham Palace was buzzing like a hive in peak season. Tourists armed with cameras and smartphones stood shoulder to shoulder, vying for the best spots along the barriers. The air was filled with the cacophony of chatter, the clicks of camera shutters, and the squeals of children tugging at their parents' hands. Moments later, the crowd hushed, as if anticipating the start of a grand spectacle. Amid this chaos stood an American named Brian, conspicuously out of place. Tall and lanky with short, slightly windblown blonde hair, he looked like the walking stereotype of a typical tourist from America. He wore a bright red t-shirt emblazoned with a bold logo, a Make America Great Again cap, khaki shorts that boldly revealed his pale knees, and pristine white sneakers that looked more fashionable than comfortable. "Susie, you won't believe where I am right now," he said loudly into his phone, his voice cutting through the noise of the crowd and drawing curious glances. "Right in front of Buckingham Palace with hundreds of people watching. Hold on, I'm about to make the best video of my life. You know how good I am at this." With confidence, he switched his phone to camera mode and began recording everything in sight, narrating his shots with over-the-top enthusiasm. "Oh, look at this crowd. These soldiers look like something out of a movie. And, of course, this is epic." At that moment, the resounding echo of marching boots began to fill the square. The crowd fell silent, and the first gasps of admiration rippled through the air. From around the corner, the ranks of the Royal Guard appeared, stern and majestic, as if they had stepped out of a historical painting. Their scarlet uniforms gleamed in the sunlight, their tall bearskin hats adding an almost mythical grandeur, and their perfect posture and synchronized steps bordered on magical. The barriers emphasized the boundary between spectators and the unfolding ceremony. The ropes stretched along the guard's route seemed fragile yet sacred, a line of demarcation tourists respected almost religiously. Almost everyone, that is. Brian, absorbed in his phone, failed to notice the taut rope in front of him. His narration grew louder as he backed up, trying to capture as much of the scene as possible. The crowd, noticing that he was dangerously close to the edge of the path, began murmuring. But Brian, lost in his filming, seemed oblivious to everything around him. And then it happened. In an attempt to get an even more dramatic shot, Brian clumsily stepped over the rope, landing squarely on the path of the advancing guards. A collective gasp arose from the crowd. People froze in place, and some raised their phones to capture the unfolding drama. The guards' march continued, their faces as impassive as statues. Brian turned around, still unaware of his misstep. When he finally noticed the approaching guards, he let out a sheepish chuckle, smiled nervously, and, rather than stepping back, lifted his camera higher and muttered, "Well, if this doesn't go viral, I don't know what will." The crowd gasped, and the guards pressed on, unflinching, their route unwavering. The Royal Guard continued their majestic procession, like a living machine calibrated with millimeter precision. The soldiers' boots struck the ground in a flawless rhythm, echoing across the square like a drumbeat. The crowd held their breath, captivated by every step. No one dared to move, fearing they might disrupt the grandeur of the moment. No one except Brian. The man stood in the middle of their path, grinning foolishly with his camera pointed directly at the advancing guards. His stance was so ridiculous that someone in the crowd shouted, "Get out of the way!" Others began murmuring, and a few raised their phones, sensing this moment would become something far more memorable than a routine changing of the guard. Brian turned around, his face calm and his mouth twisted into a self-satisfied smirk. He seemed to believe the guards would simply stop or go around him, but their emotionless faces and razor-sharp movements suggested otherwise. "Are they seriously not going to stop?" he muttered mockingly into his camera, turning even more toward the oncoming soldiers. The column was only a few meters away now. The lead guard, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern gaze, showed no sign of slowing down. Brian finally realized the guards were truly planning to march straight through him. Yet, instead of stepping back, he laughed loudly, as if his confidence knew no bounds. Then came the booming command, "Attention!" The officer's voice split the air like thunder, but it was not an order to halt. It was a signal to maintain their course without deviation. The guards marched directly toward Brian. The first blow came swiftly. The lead guard's shoulder collided with Brian like a tank, knocking him off balance and sending him to the ground. Still clutching his phone, Brian let out a startled cry as he lost his footing. The camera flew from his hand, and he hit the pavement with a thud. Before he could get up, the second soldier stepped forward, his boot landing dangerously close to Brian's hand. The crowd gasped audibly. Before the eyes of dozens of spectators, Brian became like a rag doll beneath the guards' unyielding steps. The column marched on with precision, neither altering their rhythm nor their route. Every step left an imprint not only on the pavement but also on the hapless tourist. Boots crushed his red t-shirt, grazed his legs, and even knocked his cap off to the side. "Oh my God!" someone screamed in panic from the crowd. But no one dared to intervene. Even those who might typically argue with authority stood frozen, paralyzed by the surreal spectacle. When the guards finally passed, leaving behind their perfectly aligned formation, Brian lay sprawled in the middle of the road. His clothes were dirty and torn in places, his face contorted with pain. But he was alive. Propping himself up on his elbows, he looked around at the crowd. That was wild. He groaned through a pained smile, trying to laugh, though his expression revealed more discomfort than amusement. His camera lay nearby, miraculously intact, as was its owner, though his confidence seemed noticeably dented. The crowd stared at him with a mix of shock and disbelief. No one knew whether to help him or continue watching in stunned silence. For a moment, the square was utterly still. The guards, as if nothing had happened, continued their march toward the palace, maintaining their majestic composure. Brian, lying on the ground, appeared to have been erased from their reality. When the last guard disappeared behind the massive gates of Buckingham Palace, an uneasy silence fell over the square. All eyes remained on Brian, who lay in the middle of the road. For a few seconds, no one dared to approach him. Then, a few brave individuals, 2 men and a woman, stepped forward to help. They bent over him carefully, assisting him as he struggled to his feet. Brian looked like he'd been through a small battle. His red t-shirt was smeared with dirt and dust, with a visible boot print on one shoulder. His shorts were torn at the knee, revealing a scrape, and his once pristine white sneakers were now scuffed and dull. His cap lay off to the side, its brim bent out of shape. But what caught everyone's attention most was his face. Scratches on his cheek and a small bruise under his eye gave him the appearance of a man who had just survived an ambush. To everyone's surprise, Brian managed to stand on his own, swaying slightly and clutching his back. His face was strained, and short groans escaped his lips, but he tried to appear upbeat. Scanning the gathered crowd, he flashed a wide grin, as if attempting to regain control of the situation. "I'm fine. I'm alive," he declared loudly, waving one arm in the air as if he'd just won a competition. The crowd erupted into applause, a mix of relief, amazement, and a touch of mockery. Despite his confident demeanor, Brian was clearly in pain, his smile strained and his eyes betraying his discomfort. One woman pulled wet wipes from her bag and began gently cleaning the dirt from his face, while one of the men retrieved his cap and handed it back. The crowd gathered closer. Some brushed dirt from his clothes, while others held him by the elbow to steady him. Yet most preferred to keep their distance, capturing the moment through the lenses of their phones. Videos and photos flooded social media with dramatic headlines. Tourist trampled by the Royal Guard. Traditions versus tourists. Who's in the right? Changing of the guard turns chaotic. By evening, the story of the clash had gone viral. Online debates raged. Some defended the guards, insisting that traditions must be upheld, while others condemned their lack of compassion. Rules are rules, some argued. This was unnecessary brutality, others countered. Either way, Brian's name became infamous overnight. Hours later, Brian found himself in a local hospital being examined for bruises and a possible concussion. Fortunately, he escaped with only a few scrapes and bruises. In the hallway outside, a swarm of journalists eagerly waited for a statement. When Brian finally emerged, limping slightly but still exuding his trademark cocky attitude, he smiled and addressed the cameras. "That was epic," he began, winking at the nearest reporter's camera. "But I definitely won't be crossing paths with the Royal Guard again. My advice to all tourists, watch for the signs." His words elicited laughter and applause, though some suspected his jokes were a thinly veiled attempt to hide his embarrassment. By morning, Brian's name dominated news headlines and memes across social media. His video became a viral sensation, amassing millions of views. A few days later, Brian found himself once again in the square in front of Buckingham Palace. This time, he stood safely behind the barriers, carefully recording commentary for his blog. The crowd, recognizing him, began to clap and smile. Some even asked for selfies, calling him that tourist. Unexpectedly, a representative of the Royal Guard approached him, holding an official letter. Inside it read, "Mr. Brian, your actions demonstrated a lack of respect for tradition. However, as a gesture of forgiveness, we invite you to visit Buckingham Palace and learn more about the history of the Royal Guard. We hope you will respect our protocol in the future." Brian, smiling sheepishly, read the letter aloud on camera, calling it his strangest achievement ever. His story quickly became a lesson for all tourists, a reminder that even foolishness can make you famous.